and welcome everyone to the first episode of the second season of Trash Takes. I'm your host, Theo Aronstam, joined by Wesley Jeng, Jacob Hsia, and Hajime Sano. We have Jerry manning the camera, and that's not to discredit the absolutely extraordinary work of Steve producing the whole shebang in the back. Today we have two special guests, Patrick Donohue and Joshua Boris. Today we were going to use this episode to bounce off concepts like friend groups and just explore that concept as a whole. So I'll start off as I always do. How is your guys' weekends? How was your guys' weeks?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Theo. It's been really good so far. It has been a little slow, but it does make sense since we are almost to the Thanksgiving break, which I am very excited for.
Yeah, I had a pretty good weekend. Definitely excited for Thanksgiving break coming up.
How's y'all's college applications going? Let's go with that because I don't know about you guys, but my UCSAs, I don't know. I'm procrastinating very hard. I gotta get to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why my week has been kind of stressful. I feel like there's a lot of things just creeping up, and I don't know. It's been a little bit tougher than normal.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with where I am in the college application process, but yeah, I'm definitely in that final stretch of regular decision applications.
Yeah, all I have to do is finish up the UC applications. I've done my Cal States and out-of-state privates. So,
Nice. Yeah, for me, it's like I don't try to get myself too worried. Like I know what I got to do and stuff. But I think at the same token, like my fight or flight doesn't really kick in, and I'm not as dialed in as I could be, just for like life in general, but especially for this college app process. So that's why it's a little bit iffy on my end. But I think as in general, I think ultimately it's going to be fine. I'm going to go to college.
yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So today we all wanted to use this episode to bounce off like. We've all been in a variety of different friend groups, whether that be a entirely male friend group or groups, co-ed friend groups. So I think we wanted to use this episode today to just like bounce off all our different experiences, see what kind of societal pressures linger within each and every friend group. And so open the stage to you guys. What are your thoughts about like friend groups today?
So I have a story. It's going to be kind of long, but bear with me. So I have a couple of friends in college, right? One of them bought a concert ticket in summer, like July, whatever. It doesn't matter. And the concert was supposed to be last weekend. But if he went, he was probably most likely going to fail his class. Right. So he's torn because obviously the ticket was expensive. It was like $300. So he's like, well, what am I going to do if I go? I fail the class. If I don't go, I like wasted $300. Right. So he's having a tough time. My first instinct was to talk to him about his feelings and how he was feeling, how his emotional state was, which is what I primarily saw in a lot of the female identifying groups that I was a part of in the past, right? And what I noticed my other friends' reactions was it was more practical. It was more problem solving kind of, if that makes sense. So people were saying like, can you sell the ticket? Can you like do a night of cramming to finish the assignment before the concert? That sort of thing, right? I just thought that was sort of interesting. I thought that was like, it was something. It was a difference that I experienced very directly, right? I was wondering if you guys had any sorts of experiences with that kind of stuff.
I can't really speak on, I guess, others because I feel like there's just a lot of variability among people, and of course, I can really only speak to, male identifying friend groups. But I feel like I ran into a situation over the weekend where because you had told us that story when we were planning the episode, and I kind of noticed a situation where I really was trying to solve a problem that I really feel like there was no solution to. And I feel like the trying to solve it kind of just led to more issues. You know what I mean? And I feel like in some instances that that idea, I don't know if it's because I'm a male identifying person, or I don't know, it might just be who I am. But yeah, I mean, I have noticed that, I guess, in situations that might require a more emotionally based response, it's trying more to solve the issue when sometimes there is no solution.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, basically, like I feel like a lot of guys, their first instinct is try to solve the issue, like sort of like present a solution or just help them out, sort of. Not all guys, but a lot of times that's been my experience. But sometimes what people need is like emotional, just sort of support. Like, yeah, you got this, man. I'm sure everything will be right. You know. But why do you guys think that might be?
I think it's just how we're linked as people, or I should say as men, since society has pushed this image of like, oh, we're the problem solver, we're like the big tough man. It's our job to solve problems when they arise and do it in like a neat, orderly fashion and get it right more or less the first time. Because I personally, going off of what you were saying, Josh, I do try to fix my problems right off the bat. And I try to do everything in my power to make sure that the problem is one fixed properly and that whether it happens again, I'll be ready for it. But then there are the times when even me myself, like brute force isn't going to fix the problem. So then you have to take a step back, think about it, and be like, well, I have this pretty big problem in front of me now. How can I deal with this? Obviously, brute force isn't going to do anything about it. So now I actually have to stop, think. Maybe my friend group can actually tell me what I can do to get around this problem or just deal with it. So that, me personally, that's how I see the situation.
Yeah, definitely. I can see the same thing in myself. My philosophy has always been like, if there's a problem, I'm going to have to solve it eventually, and emotions would be secondary because you can be in a different emotional state, but that doesn't change the fact that you still have to solve the problem. And I've always thought that way, and I don't know if there necessarily is an explanation for that, but that's always been prevalent in my life. So I've made it a priority, and I think it is important to accept the perspectives of female identifying friends like those in Hajime's group, and just a variety of perspectives is, in my opinion, the best way to approach these sorts of issues.
I agree with Jacob. Yeah, definitely. We're definitely not saying like being a problem solver is a bad thing, right? Obviously, it's not. It's a good thing. Probably, like Jacob said, the best approach to solving any sort of issue is a combination of both. You want to be able to solve the problem, but you also want to be able to emotionally counsel with whoever you're dealing with, right? But I just wonder why there's such a huge divide, right? Like we touched on this earlier, but it just confuses me why there's such a prominent split.
Question. When you say divide, do you mean between who?
Between male identifying people, female identifying people, just at least from my personal experience, right? Like in friend group dynamics, when problems happen, the way we different friend groups deal with them, right? Like after that incident I talked about with the concert ticket, I started paying attention more to how the different groups solve their issues, and obviously it wasn't all cases, but definitely in a lot of the cases with my guy friends, they were more problem oriented, pragmatic people, and in my girlfriend's group, they were more sort of I guess emotionally charged, I feel like.
Yeah, I think it's probably like important to have sort of like a balance of like, you know, trying to solve the issue and offering emotional support to your friends. And I think that a lot of male identifying people would probably, I think, basically what I'm trying to say is they feel a need to suppress their emotions oftentimes. I feel like it's not always the case, but sometimes as a whole, that's been my experience with some male identifying people. And so by suppressing their emotions, the only option is to solve the issue instead of getting or offering that emotional support. So I think finding the balance between that is good, like offering your friends emotional support or trying to solve the issue. It's a good time for either.
Yeah, building on that idea of the balance, something that I've seen, I was watching a Jordan Klepper video of like why, or they asked this female Trump supporter if they would support Hillary Clinton, and she said, like, no, women are emotionally charged, and if a woman was president, there'd be a war in a couple seconds, right? But sometimes we do need that balance, and we do need that female perspective, right? And like you look at Finland and Norway, they have females in position of power, and that has contributed to a pretty good state of their government.
Yeah. That's what I like about the European countries. Like, yes, we as Americans, we came from the Europeans and we've always seen them as bad. But it's like no country is ever going to be at like the peak of their capabilities, especially with us in America. Like, we've always had our problems. Every country has their problems, but we can't really like make our country as diverse as people in the US would want it to be. Yes, there have been attempts. Yes, there have been successes. It's just we've lived so long in the US, especially with our ancestors going back to the founding of the US. It's just society has set standards as to what a man and a woman should be able to do and what they can do. And that's still going on today in the 21st century. And it's just crazy to think about, like, oh, the man is the problem solver. He has to do all the hard work while the woman has to stay at home. She must tend to her duties. Everyone has what they need to do. And yes, as it's gone on, people have wanted change from that, and there has been change. So it's just, I would love to see more change. I'd love for the US to start developing more ideas like the European countries, as you were saying, Jacob. I'd love to see a female president because what is Joe Biden's our 51st president?
46.
46, thank you. We have had 46 male presidents, and only one of them, being Barack Obama, is a man of color. We've only had that once. So it was a big change for us since we were children. We lived during that time when Barack Obama was in office. And so going back to my original point, I'd love to see the US do that again. Just make the government more diverse than it is now.
Going back to Hajime's point, I think, Jacob, I like your how you synthesize kind of like emotional and then like with the material, like with the ticket or whatever, how there should be like a balance. But I think in my personal opinion, I think it would be like more touching and I would feel more like seen, like if like I was more how you kind of like you kind of catched up with you catched up with your friend more so emotionally rather than like focus on like the ticket and the material. And I think it would be more touching in for me if seen if like that was the approach. Rather, I think if someone was like, what are we gonna do with this ticket? I think I would still feel like, oh, I'm glad that my friends are helping me. and that they're trying to solve this problem with me. But I think for me as an individual, I think prioritizing just like emotional support, making sure that person is in the best of mind that they can be at that current point in time, and you're providing whatever resources you can, or just being there for that person on that emotional level, I think is really important.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but I almost feel like it really depends on the situation and the problem. I mean, I feel like, with some issues like I had before this weekend, I mean, I feel like there is no solution. So a problem-solving approach won't really help. But like, let's say you were having like a lot of trouble on the homework or something. I feel like in that instance, then maybe the problem-solving method would be work better. I mean, I don't know. I feel like, oh, sorry.
I wasn't going to say anything. I was just agreeing with Wesley.
I think in this instance, I think I agree with you. It's probably not the best approach to be like, I know exactly what to do. But more so, I think in that current moment would be like, how, like, I'm sorry that happened to you. Like, how are you feeling? I think that would just be like, just those like simple words, I think are like, that's kind of just like what's the most necessary in that point, in like making sure that this individual is like feeling all right, feeling okay. And then I think once that's happened, I think maybe you can offer help with like how you want to maneuver around like selling the ticket or whatever. But I think in that same sense, you shouldn't be like overbearing and be like, okay, but you need to do this and that, and just be like. But I think as in general, yeah, I don't know why it's like, I think the men were more like material oriented, while the women were like the females, the girls in that group were more like emotionally oriented. I think for me, well, I was kind of like touching on Patrick and Joshua brought up some good points, and I think for me, just the way that we like messages that have been like brought to us like societally, and then just like bounced around through friend group. I feel like as in general, it just kind of makes it hard for, like, I think we're not really, as a men societally, or even me as an individual, I'm not really conditioned in the way that I want to be when it comes to like trying to give emotional support or trying to receive emotional support. And I don't know, and I don't really know why that is. But I think Patrick and Joshua, what gives me a little bit of insight is like Patrick and Joshua. You were kind of touching about Patrick, like it's men's like that men have been tasked in the past to be like problem solvers. I also think that inverse is true. Like men have not really been tasked to be like the caretakers, sort of like, and like give like emotional like support, or like just like, when even like that childbirth scenario is like that's usually more tasked in like the women's area societally. So yeah.
Yeah, just thinking about possible explanations for that dichotomy of different societal roles. I think it's founded on the idea that men or males and females sexually are biologically different, and humans we're a creative species, and when we see differences like that, we automatically assign roles and stereotypes to that. So as long as that biological difference exists, which it inevitably will, I think we're kind of stuck with these roles, and we're going to have to learn how to work with them.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like, it almost gets into like psychology, because like naturally we like to categorize things in our heads. So like that's probably what we did with like gender roles. Like men do this, they go off, do the work, and women do this, they care for the kids. And so I guess sort of where we are is we're in a process of where we're trying to change that, or not set those stereotypes so that people can be free to do whatever they want to do.
It kind of reminds me of, in a documentary I think we watched last week in Econ, they were talking about how Iceland is doing one of the best jobs out of any country in trying to close that gender pay gap. And I think one of the things that the documentary touched on is that men were in contracts and working contracts, they were given like a leave of absence that they could take during childbirth, and it would so that gave incentive for men to take that leave of absence and then in turn take care of children. So one of the observations that they kind of learned is now that there was that kind of like act that just like that agreement in place, that men like in Iceland are more like have more incentive to take care of their children at the same caliber that women do. And I think their observations were that it was just like it's like a nice environment, and that they do a wonderful job taking care of them. That's yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because I also watched the video, but I'm pretty sure it said it was like mandatory for the men.
Yeah.
Wasn't it like, and it was also like 2 months as well, I think it was?
I don't think it was mandatory, but I think it was like you take it or leave it. Like
Yeah,
if you don't take it
you
now,
take it or leave
then you don't get it in the future.
Yeah, so it's really like, that's what, as I was saying earlier, that's what I really like about the European countries that I wish the US would apply as well, because it's like, this is our time to make a difference. So now that what Iceland's doing is just like, okay, man, your wife is going to have a baby. We're going to give you a check for a certain amount, depending on how much time you're going to leave, so you, the man, can look after your child so that your wife can now go back and work. So now she doesn't have to spend the next 9 or less months, depending on how long she needs to be out on leave, so that you as the father can fill in that role, take care of your child. It shouldn't be just your wife taking care of the child. So that's what I really liked watching that video in Econ, because it's true. The wage gap between men and women has gotten really large ever since, well, the wage gap was, it's always been there. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So now it's good that people are going there and they're saying, well, that's not fair. We need to make a change. And they have made a change for the better.
Well, actually, I'll disagree with you on this small point. I think that the wage gaps are getting smaller because, in like 19th century and before the Industrial Revolution, women really didn't work at all, and they're just the providers of the home. So their wage was zero, like actually zero. Mm-hmm. So we have seen some improvement in that regard.
Yeah. Obviously, I'd have to do more research into it, but I feel like I've heard something about but I feel like another part of the wage gap. I don't know if it's expanding or decreasing, but I also heard that it's also partly because of like what kinds of jobs, I guess, the genders are encouraged to go towards. Because of course, there's a huge, I guess, gap in the STEM fields, and of course, I feel like, I don't know for certain, but I feel like STEM jobs and stuff like that, I guess, are typically higher paying, I think, maybe. And in that sense, I guess maybe as we reach as the world kind of shifts more to a science and STEM, I guess, based world, perhaps that could be increasing the wage gap. I don't really know. But, okay. If you want to continue the point.
Of course, yeah. No, I really like that point because it's true. It's so true, especially when once we were children and we had the gender assignment of boys do this, girls do that. That was drilled into our brains. And keep in mind, this is like halfway through the 2000s, where there's already change starting, because the 80s and 90s were bad. They were good, but there was a lot of bad. And so over that time, just the government was going through, making changes to appease the people. And then we're born, we start school, we get those messages like, oh yeah, you have to do this and you have to do that. And now that we're older and we're doing this podcast, you guys are, it really makes a person think like, yeah, when we were younger, they were doing that. They were telling us that we could only do this or we could only do that. Especially as you were saying, a lot of STEM jobs, like big triumphant moments for women when women were finally getting into jobs that were just for men. Those were big crowning achievements that go down in history because it's a big milestone. And so, because of that, the women who see that, like, if she can do it, I can do it too. And so that caused the chain reaction of revolution. Women were starting to now attend jobs and do them that were normally just meant for men. So it's that huge step up in our society where anyone can do whatever they want. There's nothing really holding them back now.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that fact, and the fact that once gender roles start to interfere with what the individual wants to do, that's when we start to see conflict, and that's when it starts to become wildly unproductive, and that is why I agree with the reforms that are being done from that and that narrowing of the wage gap, especially in Iceland, and yeah, that's definitely a step in the right direction, because what we really want, it should be a team effort. Everything from working in the STEM field to raising a family. It should be a team effort with both the male and the female perspective, should those perspectives be different.
If I could bring up a new point, I feel like we've exhausted this current topic. I have another short story. When last year, junior year, we, us six, we presented our podcast to, I think it was elementary schoolers, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we were in groups of maybe 4 to 6 elementary schoolers. And we went to Whitterfield and we talked to them about our project, right? And every other group was doing that at the same time. And our group, as soon as we sat down, it was just the 3 girls on the left side, the 3 boys on the right side, and there was clearly like 4 or 5 feet of space between those 2 groups. You look around at the other groups, exactly the same situation. And these are elementary schools. They're like 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds, right? Like, surely they can't be old enough to fully understand gender roles and the pressures that society puts on different genders to act certain ways, right? So why do you think at even such a young age this sort of split happens?
I don't know, but I think I'm trying to reflect on like my own personal experiences from elementary school, and it's a while back, and I don't really have a great real recollection of all my thoughts and all the different dynamics. But I think I'm trying to in probably the middle of elementary school, I would be seeing like guys, and they would have be friends with like different girls, and then me, and I was like, I don't really have any friends that are females or friends that are girls, sorry. And it was like, I was kind of envying those people in a sense, and now looking back at it, it's kind of that that fact that I just envied them is kind of messed up, because all in all, there's not really much of a difference between guys and girls, and so yeah, I'm really curious as to why that might be, yeah, and I think my kind of thoughts, my own experiences where I would kind of surround myself with a lot of guys, I feel like that was really parallel in what we saw at when we were presenting our project.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like, well, I just want to add something really quick. What I thought was really funny about that story is that while we were seeing the gender split amongst the kids, I thought what was really interesting was that you could clearly see that same gender split amongst the high schoolers. Yeah, so I just thought that was so interesting and so funny, because I mean, low-key, even us, we were like kind of congregating. Well, I think it might be just a product of our own group because I guess
Yeah.
we're all male identifying. But there you could see clear splits in the elementary schoolers reflected into the high schoolers.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know. I feel like to me, I would be careful about saying that they have no idea or no understanding because I feel like these gender roles are I guess, we're basically indoctrinated from when we're born, man.
Yeah.
Even our names have different gender. Their names are gendered. When we were born, we're given either like a blue room or a pink room. There's things like, the cars and the robots and the sports or versus the, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a boy. Blue confetti shoots out.
Yeah.
True.
It gets
Or
just
blue
kind of,
whatever.
Yeah. Like it's.
I think it's kind of assumed that, like from a very young age, it's kind of assumed that boys will be hanging out with other boys and girls will be hanging out with other girls. I feel like at least that was my experience, I feel like.
Yeah, I know for me personally, and I'll keep my segment a little short just so I don't ramble on. I know in elementary school for me, it was very divided, as it was for all of us, boys with boys, girls with girls. Maybe an occasional girl and vice versa, a boy would go over to the other group, but then he or she would get kicked out and something along the lines of, oh, boys can't do this or girls shouldn't do this. Because I think when we're young, it's just what we as that group of either boys or girls is into. So we see that as the male or female thing to do. But then once we get to middle school, because I remember, Wesley, this was like one of the main points we were talking about long before we were going to film this episode. But it's like once we hit middle school, that gap, that continental wall, like slowly starts to come down as we are to mix with a bunch of different other people, male and female, or neither. It's just in that moment, it's like, okay, I'm getting older, I'm getting more mature. I can't just always stay in that group of boys all the time. Yes, I can do that, but I should expand. And as you go through middle school and high school, that wall comes down and down further and further. And so, as you were saying in your classes, it's like it's very split. But when you're during brunch and lunch, you can really see the mix. You see the boys with girls together, at least me personally. I don't know about you guys. But it's like those walls have come down. Like everyone is mixing together. It's no longer just boys and girls. Yes, in high school, there are the people who are just like, oh, I only really want to hang out with boys. Or the girls are like, oh, I only really want to hang out with the girls. And it's like, yes, that is your choice, which is fine. You may not be comfortable enough to actually make friends with the other gender. But then there's just everyone else who's just like, there's nothing wrong with having a girl or a boy as a friend. It's just...
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think when you're in, like, elementary school, it's like, or at least this is what my experience was, is like, maybe I wouldn't want to be friends with girls because I wouldn't want my other guy friends to think that's weird, right? Because in elementary school, that's kind of how it was. But in high school, it's like people wouldn't really think it's weird if you're friends with girls. But it comes down to what you're comfortable with. That's why I think a lot of guys and girls sort of segregate, and some don't. But it just depends on personal preference.
Yeah.
We would know very well about that at our Halloween party that Wesley held for us. Very, very, very segregated. It was a scene. You should have seen us. Long table, a little longer than this, obviously. Boys, not including Ginger, and then all girls. Funniest thing. We could not stop joking about it, or me personally.
But I think it's funny, but I think if you try to think about it for a while, kind of maybe adds to a bigger issue. or maybe this or maybe going back to Jacob's, maybe this a biological thing, or is it these societal pressures still linger and we don't feel comfortable integrating?
Well, I think in this case, it's more of what sort of what we're comfortable with, because I feel like all the guys kind of know each other pretty well, and I think maybe some guys know the girls better than others, but we just kind of segregate ourselves naturally. I feel like I don't always think it's a bad thing, but I think it's not always necessary. But yeah, why do you think that is?
Well, I think it totally makes sense, right? People naturally hang out with people who they can relate with, and people who are interested in the same things as them, and that was definitely true for me in elementary school. But then it gets into the question. I saw this in my psychological development as an elementary school student, but part of it was like societal standards and gender roles. Like my hesitation to go up and talk to females was due to that those societal norms, right? Like I would think that they'll turn the conversation to like shopping or something that I'm not interested in. They might make it romantic, right?
Unfamiliar.
Yeah.
I kind of want to talk about my own experiences in elementary school because they are vastly different from what has been talked about so far. My best friend in elementary school was a girl named Emma, and um, obviously I had guy friends, but a lot of my friends were girls, so I was very comfortable talking to both girls and guys about a lot of things, right? And it's not like the girls were super boyish and my guy friends were super girlish. Like my best guy friend was like a huge football guy, even in elementary school, right? Yeah, and then a lot of my girl friends were also like the one of them I remember had like a doll collection or something, right? Like these are things that would stereotypically be boy or girl activities. So it wasn't like the girls were boyish and the guys were girlish.
Yeah.
So that's besides the point. The point is that I was pretty comfortable talking to both genders, right? So this was in Illinois. I lived in Illinois before. I moved here in fourth grade, and I was honestly pretty shocked at how how much the divide was here. I don't know why it was the case in Illinois where I feel like the divide was less prominent, but I came here and it was like at lunch tables at Havens, it was really like one table was full of guys, one table was full of girls, etc., etc., etc. That was just shocking to me, right? It was a really surreal experience. So I'm I don't quite know. Maybe it's like a Piedmont sort of thing, but I don't want to say that. I don't want to generalize, obviously. I'm not quite sure how that's happened and how where I lived in Illinois it was much less segregated.
I mean, that is interesting, yeah, because I've only gone to Piedmont elementary schools and Piedmont schools, so I wouldn't be one to speak on it, but that is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
You know what I'm kind of thinking it might be is that the fact that it's just like that path towards the 3 elementary schools to that 1 middle school to that 1 high school. A lot of there's a whole bunch of like instances of like people really changing their friend groups up. A lot of them still like stick together, and I think that kind of how I think we've all kind of, well, except for Hajime, I think in our elementary school experiences, like early in Wildwood or early in our respective elementary schools at Piedmont. That's where like we harbored ideas of just being with other guys, and I think maybe like that like dynamic has kind of like harbored itself into like friend groups, and we've kind of like instead of like going to a school where that you don't know anybody previously, I think maybe if it's like that kind of dynamic, I think it's more so you maybe inclined to just meet people out in general, because I feel as you get older, you kind of like become more comfortable with like everybody. Maybe those are a couple of thoughts that I have.
So like the fact that in the future you know that you'll be sticking with this group of people, you're more comfortable just sticking to what you're comfortable with, I guess.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
For me, like, since basically everyone at Piedmont went to the same preschool as everyone else, so they have that connection there. Like, yes, I did go to a preschool in Piedmont. I actually went to, you know where that big old White House is over by the middle school?
Yes.
Oh, the one right next to it?
Yeah, the one right next to across the street. That's where I went for preschool. I was there 2 years because, as I like to call it, I got held back. But my parents just said they wanted me to have one more year to actually play. So I knew kids who were seniors before us. And then I got to know the people, you guys, even though you guys obviously didn't go to the same preschool I went to. It's that different headspace, I guess I should say. Because I remember personally, even though preschool was such a long time away, at preschool I actually did play with both boys and girls. And maybe the reason was because it was such a small group of people actually at that preschool. I think it was either under 10 or over 10. So it's like there's enough people to play with. So there's enough diversity to actually play amongst the two genders.
What's interesting is I'm now thinking about it, I did have a similar experience. My friends in preschool as well, it was a pretty co-ed group. But I also think at the same time, this might be like a misrecollection of what was actually going on. But I did internalize the idea that men usually, like boys are friends with other boys, or more so. So I don't know. Yeah, that's I don't know. So.
I almost feel like there's a trend here because when you said that, Patrick, I realized that before I went to Piedmont, I was in like kindergarten-ish. I did have close female friends, I guess. It wasn't until I went to Piedmont and went to Wildwood and went to Piedmont Middle School that I really had that segregation of gender. So maybe
that is weird because if you think about it, like everything before preschool, you're obviously playing with kids of both genders. You get into elementary school, everything gets segregated. Yeah. And then you go into middle and high school, and then you start connecting again. Yeah. So that's a really weird topic to think about. What specifically in our brains clicks between preschool and middle school, that elementary, those 5 years of elementary, well, 6 because of kindergarten, those 6 years, what turns on in our brain that tells us, oh, you have to play with just the boys or just the girls? Why does it turn on only during elementary school and not before or after?
I almost feel like that's a leading question because I think
it is.
Yeah, I think what I see makes the most sense is puberty. And I think
I was going to say that. In elementary school, it's just like you just kind of, or at least in Piedmont, it was more segregated, but you kind of just go with who you're comfortable with, and then as you progress into middle school, it's kind of the same dynamic. It starts to change back in high school, when suddenly there's a reason to be interested in the other gender or whoever you're attracted to, I guess, that you wouldn't normally hang out with. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, that's probably their motivation to, in high school, start making new friends of the opposite gender.
Now, hear me out, guys. Imagine a world where that didn't happen. Could you fathom that? Yeah. That would be, insane.
What's interesting for me now is, I can definitely fathom that, but trying to, maybe looking at, a couple of years ago, maybe I wouldn't understand that to the same degree that I do now. And I think my kind of answer to the question, it might be, to your question is why it's we have the preschool experience, elementary, all those different experiences, and you guys are saying puberty. I think this might be as a result of puberty, but I think, my, degree of, self-awareness has kind of, gone like this. And And so when I was in preschool, I was just like, I'm just hanging out with the people, like enjoying people's company. I'm like definitely not thinking too much into it. I'm a little baby, a little kid. But
My
then,
brain has not fully developed yet.
yeah, exactly.
And
then,
won't until I'm 22, I think it is.
And then as I gotten older, kind of like in the elementary school, middle school realm, I was like, I want to surround my like I think I don't know exactly what my thought process was, but it's like I want to surround myself with more guys, make sure I have that kind of like the sense of community. And then as I've gotten older, it's like it kind of just like doesn't matter who, like if it's a guy or a girl that you're friends with. It's like it's just like people are people. They have similar desires. There's not like there's so much that we have more. So we have so much more in common than we do differently. Like at a biological standpoint, or even just like interest as in general.
I don't know. I guess how I kind of see it is that I guess when we're like little elementary school kids, I mean like we're like all little innocent children. Like I mean like Theo said, we're just like we're little baby kids just running around doing whatever. We're doing whatever.
Still in diapers.
But then I feel like once I guess puberty hits in, this is what I've seen. I felt like in middle school, I felt like there was more segregation, or maybe it's just like the kind of like the tail end of elementary school.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like that's partly due to like the I guess heteronormative society we have, because I mean I feel like at that point once puberty hits, it's kind of like this idea that if you hang out with a female identifying person, there's always the idea or the view from others and peers and parents and adults that, oh, you guys like the teasing like, ooh, you two are hanging out. And then I feel like that introduction of relationships kind of happens I guess during puberty, I guess when we kind of move into adulthood. But then so maybe there's for me I saw an initial like increase in segregation, and that could be kind of near the end of elementary school, maybe beginning of middle school.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I guess after in high school, maybe we move past that, or we embrace that. And yeah, this is assuming
we get like more mature. We realize, oh, that's such a childish thing to do. I can't believe I was like that. We've all had that moment, I bet you.
Yeah, I think we'll need to get Dr. Chu back in here to answer that question. I really don't know.
I really been curious. I've been meaning to ask. I feel like this is a good time to ask. Like when in middle school, when I hung out with like Issa, Caitlin, Aya, that sort of group, like I know I personally got a lot of like, oh, they're dating looks, right? Like I don't know what y'all thought about it, but like from my point of view, I know a lot of people were like, oh, these people are like in a relationship or something. Like,
That's the funny thing. I don't think I ever crossed paths with you in middle school, so I've never had that thought process.
I crossed paths with you a good amount, but I was not familiar with who you were friends with.
Well, I was friends with you in middle school, and I mean I can't speak to they're dating bit, and I think that's mainly because there were multiple female identifying people in that friend group. But I do distinctly remember, thinking like, that's kind of weird. Why is Hajime hanging out with all the female identifying people? And I don't know. And I guess I don't know why I thought it was weird, but I knew I did in middle school.
I think I think that I thought in middle school was if a guy had a lot of friends that were girls, that they were just more sociable as like in general. That was kind of my thought process. I don't necessarily believe that now, but I think that was kind of how I felt when I was like in middle school.
Yeah, so one of the things I noticed in the differences between these male identifying friend groups and the code groups and the female identifying friend groups, it's the attraction to risk and especially now in high school, right? There's in male identifying friend groups, there's definitely that attraction to risk and trying to do risky things and trying to have a little fun. And in my opinion, this like here, I guess I'll share a little personal story, right? Yeah, well, sorry, brain. Yeah, so the So something that I've noticed is that attraction to risk is sometimes a bad thing and leads to bad things happening. Right? We just had the consent assembly yesterday, and we heard the statistics of how overwhelmingly male the perpetrator population is, and yeah. So one thing the personal story that I was going to talk about was over the weekend. I went to a regatta in Newport Beach, and it's like a sailing race, and the majority of the skippers were male, and there's a somewhat of a controversy because a lot of them were using this thing called kinetics, which is basically a tricky maneuver you can use to get around boats. It's specifically illegal, but some of these male skippers were trying to bend the rules a little bit to pass boats, right? And then we're also seeing that attraction to risk in like, you know, the devious licks challenges, which is completely stupid, but you see it's mostly male identifying students who are doing that. And one last example is the crime situation in Oakland, right? And something that I've noticed across all of these is that it's the lack of enforcement of rules that gets them to do this and makes it less risky to the point that people are attracted to it, right? And in the case of the consent assembly, that 90%, that the fact that 98% of rape victims aren't charged, that was shocking, and that statistic in itself is harmful because men can see, like, you know, if I sexually harass this woman, I will most likely not get charged for it, and I can get away with that. So I think that detachment from rationale and that attraction to risk is something that I've seen a lot, and you know, I don't like it. But this doesn't mean that I don't think that people in male identifying friend groups should have fun, right? Sometimes it is fun to do risky things, but as long as we act within a specific set of boundaries and a specific set of rationale, I think that's fine. But once you cross like what I call like a pillar value that our society is based upon, like the mental and physical safety of our women, or not our women, sorry. People in general. That crosses a boundary for me. Yeah.
You know what's funny? I just learned about this in psychology. Men have a tendency to think, and this is a study in psychology. Men have a tendency to think that certain things, certain actions, are worth more like cred points in a person's mind, whereas women sort of think that anything anybody does for somebody is worth 1 point and 1 point only, no matter how extravagant it is, right? So maybe that's why men are so drawn to those sorts of risky activities, right? They want to put on a sort of show so that they can get all the bonus points in people's minds. But in a female identifying person's case, they might be like, well, it's just one thing. It's just 1 point in my mind. I don't want to take this massive risk for only 1 point. You know what I mean? So I just thought that was kind of funny. We literally just learned about this last week.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Because if I'm to assume correctly, as you were saying, Hajime, how our brains give, as you were saying, bonus points, I can probably truthfully assume that we all at one point have had a moment like that. Mm-hmm. So it's just very interesting to hear that. Where do I want to go with this? It's very interesting to know that our brain is just keeping this little scorecard and awarding points based off the things we do, and they're all very different points. But then compared to how the women's brain does it, is it's just, I do this, it's worth 1 point and 1 point only. So it's a very interesting topic to consider how very different our mindsets are. compared to our counterparts.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a follow-up question to that, like sort of the do it in your cool dynamics sort of thing. Like, how would that, if it would, how would that be different in male identifying friend groups than in female identifying friend groups? Maybe
Like the peer
like
pressure.
the peer pressure
Yeah.
dynamic.
I think it's just like the male recklessness in an all male group, because as we've seen from either real life or media, it's just like you're in this group of all males and they're daring you to do certain things and they're like prodding you on so that you are forced to do said thing even though you yourself don't want to do that. That's one of the main things that I can think of. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I think this has a little bit to do with the whole problem solving versus emotional aspect that we were talking about earlier. In order to solve some problems, you do need to be able to take risks, and that societal role that we put on men does include that that ability to problem solve, and risk is a part of that. So that might be related. I'm not completely sure. I don't know if we'll ever be completely sure, but yeah, I think they're related.
Okay. And on that note, guys, thanks for tuning in to the first episode of the second season of Trash Takes. We've come so far from when we started. I can't wait for the season. I can't wait for the duration of the season. This was a really lovely conversation. It was really enjoyable. I loved synthesizing, our thoughts. We had a lot of similar discussions in the early episodes of the first season, and I really enjoyed synthesizing that with what your guys' experiences. And I think overall it was a really productive discussion. It really had my brain thinking, and it was lovely. So yeah, on that note, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you guys next time. Bye bye.
Oh, and yeah, thanks you two for coming on.
Yeah, thanks you guys.
Boris,
Thank you guys so
having
much for coming
us.
on. Yeah.
Of course.
This is such a blast.
Yeah.
All right, have a good one.
All right.